Welcome to another episode of Oriental Journeys podcast. My name is Ray Behboudi and I'm your host as we take this journey of wonders together. Ibn Battuta, the most noted explorer of the medieval world, narrated a series of first-hand, comprehensive and historically precious observations on lands to which he traveled over almost 30 years in the 14th century. This Moroccan traveler passed through countless communities, cities, and lands, and his observations, experiences, and encounters have much to tell about the world and its workings in medieval times. Guided and inspired by Ibn Battuta's footsteps, this podcast opens a portal into the world of the East for people who are curious about the past, hungry for the marvels of traveling, and contemplate the wonders of cities. In each episode, we pick a topic to explore the elements of Ibn Battuta's traveling experience, the places he visited, the people he met, the food he tasted, the locations he stayed over, and many more. Accompany us over our journeys into the distant, unfamiliar, and unknown. Kanz al-fawāঃid, or Treasure Trove, is the enticing title of a medieval Egyptian cookbook written by an anonymous author. This exceptional text comes from the Mamluks era in the 14th century, and it preserves a variety of delicious delicacies and their various benefits for the modern reader, which is of course us and you listening today. Compiled from multiple sources, the cookbook includes more than 800 colorful recipes, earnestly detailed and carefully explained. Reflecting a delightful culinary snapshot of this region and era, the book contains such categories as refreshing beverages, cold dishes, varieties of bread, healthy vegetarian dishes, exotic pickles, various omelets, all types of sweets, condiments, and many more. The Kanz as a cookbook not only reveals the secrets of sophisticated meals that would sit on the menu of sultans and viziers, but also provides instructions for simple everyday meals, from homemade halwas to commercially cooked fish of the season. The Kanz perfectly presents a multifaceted cuisine culture. It speaks of culinary traditions, social strata, cooking facilities, and gives extraordinary insight into unusual kinds of produce found in highly specialized marketplaces in Cairo as a thriving metropolis of the 14th century. With guidance from our guest, scholar, and translator Nawal Nasrallah, who has meticulously translated the text for the first time from Arabic to English, we set out to explore this fascinating book, accompanied as always by the inspired and precious observations of fellow time traveler Ibn Battuta, and take a journey of exploration into the food culture in Egypt and beyond with the flavor of all good things. Don't miss this episode. Nawal Nasrallah is an independent Iraqi scholar and an eminent translator of medieval Arab cookery manuals. Nasrallah was a professor at the universities of Baghdad and Mosul, teaching English language and literature until 1990. She is an award-winning researcher and food writer. The first edition of her cookbook, Delights from the Garden of Eden, a cookbook and history of the Iraqi cuisine, was winner of the Gourmand World Cookbook Awards 2007. Her book, Dates, A Global History, which was released in 2011, is a charming account of the date palm and its fruit. Her English translation of Ibn Sayyar al-Warraq's 10th century Baghdadi cookbook, Kitab al-Tibkh, entitled Annals of the Caliph's Kitchens, was awarded Best Translation in the World. In 2017, she translated a precious medieval Egyptian cookbook, Kanz al-fawāঃid fi tanwī' al-mawā'id, entitled Treasure Trove of Benefits and Variety at the Table, a 14th century Egyptian cookbook. Nawal has been giving talks, cooking demos, classes, and presentations on the Western Asian and North African cuisine, ancient, medieval, and present. Hello, Nawal. It's a great honor to have you here, and I'm sure that we will have a very interesting conversation today.
Thank you so much for having me.
You research, write, and translate within the discipline of medieval culinary cultures. Your work so far include Baghdadi, Andalusi, Maghrebi, and now Egyptian cookery manuals. What specific yearnings in you connect you to this tasty realm?
Well, there are a lot of things that encourage me to go on with those translations. The most important is my realization is that there's a gap in our knowledge. I mean, I'm talking about the Western civilization between antiquity and the age of the Renaissance. I realized that they knew almost nothing about the achievement of the Arabs during the medieval times. To us, when the West talks about the Dark Ages, the medieval ages as a sign of backwardness, in the Arab world, it was a different story. From the 7th century up to the 15th century, that was a glorious time for the region. Different caliphates flourished from one region to the other, starting with the Umayyads in Damascus, Baghdad with the Abbasids, Fatimids, and all the subsequent caliphates in Egypt. And then in Al Andalus, the Arabs ruled about 8 centuries in the region. During that period, they built really a glorious culture. Very little was known about it. Up until the last quarter of the 20th century, not even in the Arab world itself, we didn't know about these things. So I thought that it is time now, at least, to we have a concrete evidence of this glorious past in the form of cookbooks. They were best witnesses on this achievement, and translating them, making them available in other languages, and the awareness of the Arabs of the presence of such books. I think this will do us a great service and will add to our knowledge of what happened during that period, and fill really a gap that has been there for so long.
Amazing. You mentioned this glorious culture with various achievements. Out of wide range of achievements, why did you choose the word of cookery and culinary?
Uh, I am not a person who's in favor of politics and these things. I think food is really the best ambassador to let others know of your culture, of your background. I think food is the best medium for this kind of thing. We all have to eat, we all enjoy good food. So sharing it in a way will really make us understand each other.
The best shared topic with no controversy is food. Very smart choice. You have been born, grown up, lived, and worked in Iraq. What footprints from your background do you bring to your work as a food writer and researcher?
Oh, as I realized, I was at a very advantageous situation because when I first started researching for my Delights from the Garden of Eden, the cookbook on Iraqi cuisine and its history and its culture, I realized that the first recipes were documented in Iraq, ancient Iraq, in Babylonia. Then, when I started, further with my research, I realized that two cookbooks came from Baghdad, from medieval Baghdad. And here I am now living in the modern times. I realized that I am really at a very good position to trace the development of the cuisine I know nowadays by tracing it back to the ancient Mesopotamian times and try to see how it developed, the continuations. So it all started in Iraq. I am from Iraq, so I thought that was really my chance. And as it turned out, of course, that this medieval cuisine did not stay in Baghdad where it developed, but it was transmitted, by passage of time. It went to Egypt, it went to Al Andalus, North Africa, because of course the Middle East was very well connected by land and sea, and with the goods, with other things, with knowledge, with the culture. Cuisine also migrated to other places. That's how I thought that I can really tell a good story of how the cuisine developed in the Middle East.
Wonderful. You best use your chances and your advantages. Maybe after this, we can talk a little bit about the story of the book itself you translated, which is called The Kanz, which seems that is a very unique text and manuscript. Kanz al-fawāīd or Treasure Trove or simply the Kanz, as you normally call it, is the book you have translated from Arabic to English. What does the book title indicate about its content?
Oh, it tells a lot. For somebody who has read the book, it's quite clear that it is truly a treasure trove of dishes that developed in 14th century Egypt. Not only 14th century, I mean, most of those dishes, of course, they took time to develop and come to them into mainstream so that they become, documented in books. So the book itself, it covers so many subjects, everything that a cook needs to know about cooking all types of foods and how to prepare the dishes, prepare ingredients, clean one's utensils in the kitchen. So it is truly a treasure trove, or as he said, Kanz. Kanz is treasure in Arabic.
So Kanz literally means treasure.
Yes.
Amazing. So it's a very comprehensive book, contains all types of topics associated with food and cuisine, right?
It does indeed, yeah, yeah. I mean, if I give you an outline of the contents of the book, anybody would see what kind of a treasure it was and how fortunate we are that the anonymous writer really bothered to document all these things in a book. He was not a professional cook, but he was a compiler. I think that was his role. And the fact that he compiled all this massive material and all kinds of subjects, it tells us that there was so much written, there was so much interest in this subject at the time. And because all his sources, most of them did not survive, we are really fortunate that he really bothered to do this thing. The book, of course, deals with, first of all, it deals with the preliminaries, cooking instructions for the cook, how best to prepare dishes, choose ingredients. He begins with the bread, and then there is a long chapter, about more than 100 recipes dealing with savory foods, all kinds. And then from that, he goes to ingredients like murri, the fermented sauce, wheat-based fermented sauce that they liked so much, juices of sour grapes, juices of naranj, which is sour orange. And then, of course, he goes to the cold dishes, a category of dishes that are made in advance and then served, very convenient dishes served later on whenever they are needed. Sauces, table sauces, for example, like ketchup and all the sauces we use. Of course, no ketchup, no tomato there. They have, we call them table sauces, and other sauces like I use with the grilled dishes or so, with fish, for example. And they were, of course, those sauces were necessary, not because they are delicious, but also because the grilled dishes, for example, they were thought that they are hard to digest, slow to digest. So those sauces, with their spices, they would facilitate digestion. In addition to this, there are certain condiments. It is amazing that we find in the beginnings of what we call nowadays the hummus b'tahina, this condiment with the chickpeas and sesame paste, but they made it in a complicated way, which tells us that, it took time to develop into such complex dishes. When he finished with those dishes, he goes to the category of drinks, all kinds of drinks, because they were believed to facilitate digestion. They were not regular drinks, but they were infused, they were seasoned with the spices. And there's also an unusual chapter I find, which deals with the certain preparations that tackle the issue of feeling nauseated. We would say, why would we have such a chapter in a cookbook? This is because perhaps I think they overdid it with eating or something. They needed to just those
to balance it off.
Yeah, to balance it off. Yeah. As if the drinks were not enough, some people had to take some digestive pastes. Of course, they are seasoned differently with the spices, all to facilitate the digestion of those foods. I mean, if you eat food, you have to eat it laboriously, in good health, and without causing any harm to your body. Then, of course, the later parts of the book, they deal with the pickling vegetables. They deal with the preservation of fruits and vegetables and serve them when they are not in season. As we have to remember that they didn't have the freezers we have nowadays, no fridge. So they have to make use of the surplus of produce at the end of the season. What to do with them? Make them into pickles or preserve them. And they have their many ways to preserve these things.
Wow, it's really fascinating, Noel, that we can see the book contains this wide range of categories. Each of them has sophisticated instructions and recipes. And as you said, it's like a treasure trove. Also, you mentioned the compiler of the book. I would be very interested to know about the person behind this cookbook, given that the author is anonymous. What is your evidence to support the idea that the book is written by an Egyptian or in Egypt?
Okay, so he is anonymous. Of course, we know nothing about him, but internal evidence point to the fact that it was written in Egypt. If you read the book, you would see that there are certain ingredients that were specifically Egyptian, like the okra, the mulukhiyya, the Jews mallow. He mentions Egyptian sugar, sukkar Misri. He mentions, for example, ruz wahi, which is rice that is cultivated in the western oasis in Egypt, or dates, wahi dates also that grow in the western oasis in Egypt. He mentions certain varieties of the fish he uses, typically found in Egypt, such as sir, buri, delinas. So for sure that it is Egyptian. Not only that, but also language used. He uses dialect. And for those of us who are familiar with the Egyptian dialect, even nowadays, we can clearly see that this person is using the Egyptian dialect. And it's really interesting. I can easily imagine him talking, these words. I mean, they are similar to what we hear in Egyptian movies. So the book was written in Egypt by an Egyptian, although unfortunately we don't know who he was.
So you put together all these factors to conclude that the book is of an Egyptian identity, which makes sense. Also, you mentioned buri. It's a very special food. I haven't tasted myself. I haven't eaten buri myself, but I have heard that the buri has very special, uncommon taste. And Ibn Battuta in his travel has mentioned buri during his stay in Cairo.
I travelled next through a sandy region to the city of Dimyat. It is a city of spacious quarters and with a diversity of fruits, admirably laid out and enjoying a share of every good thing. The city of Dimyat lies on the back of the Nile, and the people in the houses next to the river draw water from it in buckets. Many of the houses have steps leading down to the Nile. Banana trees are especially abundant there, and their fruit is carried to Cairo in boats. Its sheep and goats are allowed to pasture at liberty day and night. Seafowl are sold in this city in large quantities and are exceedingly fat. In it there are to be had also various preparations of buffalo milk, which are unequaled for sweetness and delicious taste, and the fish called al-buri, which is exported from there to Syria, Anatolia, and Cairo.
Yeah, but these are very interesting passages, really.
Wonderful. The Kanz was compiled in Egypt at the time when the Mamluks were ruling the region in the 14th century. For our listeners who wish to know more about the Mamluks, you can listen to our previous episodes 4 and 5 and this era with guest Professor Doris Abu Said. Nawal, can you tell us what are some of the distinctive characteristics of the Mamluks period which have impacted the Kanz as a cookbook? I mean, what are these very highlighted attributes of Mamluks reflected in the book?
Well, what I see is that there is this kind of a class distinction between the elite and the commoners. For example, we know that the difference between the dishes that the rich people cook and the commoners prepare, categorically, they are not really different. They all cook okra. They all cook mulukhiyya, the Jews mallow, the sikbaj, the zirbaj, and the kurumbiya. But the difference is how it is prepared by the rich and how it is prepared by those who do not have really enough means. But it is interesting that in this book, in the recipes, we do find that the anonymous compiler of the book was really aware of this difference, this disparity. He mentions, for example, an ingredient which is not really cheap, like musk and civet. He said, do whatever you can, whatever amount you can afford. I mean, don't go out of your way. He also shows disparities between the tastes of the commoners and the Turks, who were, the Mamluks. He said, if you are making it for a Turk, he's speaking about a sauce. If you are making it for a Turk, add garlic to it. If you are making it for the Amma, the commoners, then add sugar to it. So he knows that they have different tastes. He's dealing with the two different kinds of social classes, and he has to accommodate to both of them. Because the Turks really were famous for favoring garlic. So this kind of thing tells you that he was aware of the social conditions at the time, and he was really considerate enough to consider them in writing his book.
Maybe we can say that he had a very good understanding of the society and put aside a lot of room for adjustments.
Yes, which is important, of course.
Let's together listen to a passage of Ibn Battuta and then get back to this topic.
The convents too are numerous. The people there call them khawaniq, the singular being khanqa, and the emirs in Cairo vie with one another in building them. Each convent in Cairo is affected to the use of a separate congregation of poor brethren, most of whom are Persians, men of good education and adepts in the way of Sufism. Each has a sheikh as superior and a warden, and the organization of their affairs is admirable. It is one of their customs in the matter of their food that the steward of the house comes in the morning to the fakirs, each of whom then specifies what food he desires. When they assemble for meals, each person is given his bread and soup in a separate dish, none sharing with another. They eat twice a day, they receive winter clothing and summer clothing, and a monthly allowance varying from 20 to 30 dirhams each. Every Thursday night they are given sugar cakes, soap to wash their clothes, the price of admission to the bathhouse, and oil to feed their lamps.
Ibn Battuta, in his account in Cairo, precisely describes amazing catering arrangements in a Sufi convent at which the chefs could be the potential users of cookbooks like Kanz. But hypotheses apart, who were some of the users and readers of the Kanz at the time, and who were its target audiences?
Okay, so it's quite clear from the book that the anonymous writer of the book, he wanted his book to be used as a practical resource for preparing the dishes. And as you said, they could have been used in this khanqa by the cooks. Also, we have to remember that they had schools for, the apprentices. In order to teach those apprentices, young apprentices, how to cook, they needed some cookbooks. And this was one of the uses of the book by training cooks. Also, because of the situation in Cairo, people ate out a lot. Most of the people who didn't have kitchens, they had to eat out, to take out food from the food market. One of the specialists in the market were called shara'ihiyin, that is the meat slicers. The function of those meat slicers, they call them shara'ihiyin because they cook dishes for people. Let us say that you do your shopping from the market, you give it to this cook, and he prepares the dish for you. So he has to really know all kinds of dishes in order to accommodate to the demands of those who bring their groceries and they ask him to cook such and such a dish. We learned from market inspection books that one of the requirements of those shara'ihiyin in order to be eligible for taking such a job is to be able to good cooks, to know all kinds of dishes. And such a book will be really quite useful. But also we have to remember that there were well-to-do families. They have their own kitchens. They would use such a book for ideas, for a variety of dishes in order to cook them. We have a good example. Kanz al-fawā'iդ was plagiarized in the 15th century by a scholar, Ibn Mubarak Shah. He wrote like a pamphlet, a small book. He summarized the Kanz. He was a kind of frugal gourmet. He doesn't like the expensive dishes, so he chose the most affordable dishes. He said, I wrote them for my slave girls. They are the work in the kitchen so that they use it. So that's another use.
It seems that from what you are saying, the cookbook was serving many types of purposes, communicating with various types of target audiences. This is amazing.
Right.
From what you were saying, another takeaway is that at the time, Cairo had a sort of undergo food culture. Also, you have elaborated in your book about this, and it's a very interesting fact that Cairo's choice was in Middle Ages was undergo food, and they preferred maybe ready cooked food. Can you explain a little bit about this culture and what were the factors contributing to this food culture?
Right. Well, in order to understand why they favored carry out food, is to understand the situation of Cairo at the time. Cairo was a very crowded city with too many crowded buildings. So in those multi-storied large buildings, sometimes you might have about 350 people living in these buildings, and there were so many of them. In those small rooms, they didn't have kitchens. There was no room for kitchens. That was important because, especially after the large fire that happened in Cairo that destroyed a lot of buildings, they discouraged kitchens in those small apartments. And of course, they didn't have really efficient running water. So when a fire bursts out, there's no way really to extinguish this fire. They have no kitchens, so they have to go out and eat and carry out, those stalls and shops.
This is really impressive. I'm just trying to imagine what you are describing. Cairo is a very congested, highly congested metropolis with a lot of multi-story compounds. People have no place to cook, and maybe also it's not very safe to cook inside. So that contributed to this like a big undergo food culture, and a little bit unbelievable because people would think that the takeaway culture is a modern thing. But at the time in Cairo, we had a very sophisticated.
Yes, yeah. Yes.
That's truly fascinating. I would like to just best use of this topic to also touch upon the thing you were talking about, the meat slices and the labor division. It appears that Cairo at the time had a very sophisticated level of labor division in food markets. There were all sorts of jobs associated with food market. If we imagine ourselves to be strolling in one of the congested food markets of Cairo in the 14th century, what was some of the occupations and businesses we might visit? You mentioned ones like meat slicers. What else we can see?
Okay, imagine that you want to prepare a meal for yourself. You would need meat, you would need vegetables, you would need spices. So it's not like nowadays we go to the supermarket and we buy all these things from one place. They had to go to different places in order to buy different things. In this respect, you have specialization. For example, the person who slaughters the animals like sheep and cows and so, is not the person who sells meat, which is called qassab, butcher, because they used to slaughter those animals outside, a little bit outside the market because of the bad smells they produce. So you have butchers, you have to buy bread, of course, if you don't have an oven in the house. Even those who had ovens, I mean, there were large houses in Cairo, even those who had ovens in the house, they preferred to make their bread in the commercial brick oven. They would make trays. People buy bread, different kinds of bread from specialized, either the tannoor or the brick oven. People also didn't like to grill their fish in the house, even if they have an oven, because they don't like the smell in the houses. And so there were market inspectors, they call muhtasib, and there were certain guides written for them to teach them how to regulate the selling and the buying of those goods in the marketplace. This is to protect the buyers from swindlers, because some people some merchants tended to cheat. What else? Okay, yeah, so there are the sellers that sell fruits only. They call them fakhani, from fakiha, fawakih. There are sellers who sell only vegetables. Yeah, there are even stalls that sell only table herbs, like parsley, leeks. That's why, they had to make like a trip to the market in order to gather all those ingredients to make a meal.
You also were talking about the inspectors, the market inspectors, muhtasab. You said that one of their responsibilities was to check no one is cheating in the market. In addition to that, is there any other responsibility for them, or the things that they were monitoring, for example, the hygiene of the food, of fresh food? What would be the scope of their responsibility in the markets?
Okay. For example, let us talk about the baking situation. They have to knead the dough, prepare the dough. So one of the regulations was that the person who kneads the dough has to shave the hair of his hands. Another important thing, he has to wear a mask to cover his mouth and his nose, just in case he sneezes or something or coughs. The butcher, for example, he was required to wash his cutting board at the end of the day and sprinkle it with the salt for the night so that, it won't be infected with all those rodents and all those insects. And they have to have good light when it gets dark so that when they cook, they have to see the things they are cooking really well. The fishmongers were not allowed to sell in the middle of the market itself because of the smells of the fish. They should not keep any fish overnight. Any fish that remains at the end of the day, they have to salt it and preserve it in one way or another and not sell it for the following day. Because, fish goes bad very quickly. They have also to inspect the spices like saffron. Some of them would cheat. For example, they will flake the breast of a boiled chicken, into threads, and then they color them yellow with the safflower, which is not as expensive as saffron. So they would look like saffron, but of course, they have not said this is not saffron. So they have many ways for cheating, and they have to be so careful with them. For example, the harissa, which is the porridge, wheat porridge, it has to have a certain consistency. It shouldn't be runny, it shouldn't be too thick, but if you put a brick on top of it, it shouldn't sink in the pot. If it doesn't sink easily, it means that is not too thin for the customers. It is good harissa. So what the what the cooks did was that they used to put a brick inside the pot, where they expect that the inspector would put his own brick. So the brick, of course, would not sink into the into the pot, but just lays on his brick, and it will pass the test.
Oh my goodness. These are great examples. They're comparable to nowadays work health and safety instructions and fact sheets and the regulations that regulating fresh foods markets. I will read through a passage from, not this time from Ibn Battuta, but from Nasr Khosrow, which would give us a brilliant showcase of Cairo marketplaces and what produce were found there and how unbelievable it can be.
Throughout Egypt is much honey and sugar cane. On the 3rd of the month of Day of the Persian year 416, I saw the following fruits and herbs, all in one day: red roses, lilies, daffodils, oranges, citrons, apples, jasmine, basil, quince, pomegranates, pears, melons, bananas, olives, marobalan, fresh dates, grapes, sugarcane, eggplants, squash, turnips, radishes, cabbage, fresh beans, cucumbers, green onions, fresh garlic, carrots, and beets. No one would think that all of these fruits and vegetables could be had at one time, some usually growing in autumn, some in spring, some in summer, and some in winter. I myself have no ulterior motive in reporting all this, and I have recorded what I saw with my own eyes, although I am not responsible for some of the things I only heard, since Egypt is quite expansive and has all kinds of climate, from the tropical to the cold, and produce is brought to the city from everywhere and sold in the markets.
We listened to impressive observations of Nasr Khosrow, a Persian traveler who visited Egypt in 11th century, like a few centuries even before Ibn Battuta. In accordance with his account and other medieval travelers alike, Cairo marketplaces, whether in the era of the Fatimids or Ayyubids or Mamluks, were home to an unbelievable range of foods and produce. In the Kanz itself, the variety of citruses, laymoon, used in the text are literally mind-blowing. Laymoon murakkab, laymoon asfar, laymoon akhzar, laymoon baladi, laymoon misri. How did this prosperity and diversity happen? And what were some of the ways that fruit could be preserved beyond their season?
Well, the presence of all this variety of fruits. You gave an example, a good example of the lemon. When we read the recipes, he mentions all those kinds of lemons. This tells us that the cities at the time did not live in a vacuum. They were really interconnected. They had close relationships with the Al-Sham, which is the Levant. What they did not have, they would easily get from the Eastern Mediterranean via Alexandria and then to all other places. Their geographical situation is really advantageous. The spices, for example, they used to get from Yemen by the Karamis. There was a group of merchants. They were called Karamis. I mentioned Yemen. It was not because they were grown there, but because by sea they were brought from all the way from India to Yemen, and from Yemen the Karamis would transfer those spices to Cairo, and from Cairo to Alexandria, and then of course they were sold to other southern Mediterranean European cities like Genoa. So that's why you have all those spices available, you have all those fruits available. So it was really a shepherd's paradise in a way.
So Cairo maybe was like a crossroad of old trade routes.
Yeah, it was strategically located. So you asked about preservation?
Yeah, how these fruits and produce were preserved beyond their season? Because with the fridges we can do this, but what about some ways of preserving fruit at the time?
Yeah, they were masters in preserving. Judging from the chapter we have, I mean, they really knew how to preserve their produce, the surplus of their produce, quite efficiently. For example, the lemon and the citrus fruit, they would make a hole they call tagmir, which is submerging. Farmers still follow this method in Iraq because this is very successful. So they would make a hole and they would line it with the clean clay and they will bury them. When of course out of season, they will take them out and use them. This was possible because they had the peels that protect them. In vegetables, for example, that they have the skins, thin skins like eggplants, cucumbers. For the eggplants, there was a way of smearing the eggplant with the clean clay, submerge them, and you take as you need, wash them and use them. They preserved grapes in different ways. They would put them in jars. They would cover them with juice of sweet grapes and they keep them. And the recipe says when you open the jar, you'll see that the grapes still look like still fresh. They also preserved quince. They preserved apples by burying. Not only that, but I also found a way of how to preserve roses when they are not in season, like in winter. You would get open, full grown flowers in the mid of winter. And he said, offer it to your friends and you will blow their minds away with their beauty. The way they did it was that they would, a stem with a bud, not open, with a bud, and they keep it in a jar, in a moist jar, and they close the jar and they put it close to water, like a pond or something. And then when you need it, you take it out, leave it just a few days, and then it will open as if it is like in the middle of its season.
Wow, these are very advanced methods.
Yeah, but this is just a few of what it's a long chapter. This is just a few of the methods he mentioned.
This is why our listeners now are encouraged to go and read through that chapter in your
Yeah.
book to learn all these tricks. And you were talking about the roses, which was one of the most unbelievable ones, that it's like freezing the growth process of a flower. This is a really good trick that you can keep it for Valentine's Day.
Oh,
Anyway.
yeah. Yeah.
And another interesting thing I just wanted to add is that the method you mentioned for burying the fruit under the ground, digging a hole, is still in use in Iran. And I have heard that this is the method that best uses the taste of the fruit, whatever it is. It's not like a fridge.
Yeah, I like the oranges, especially, when it's out of season in Iraq. Really sweet and really even better than the fresh ones. Yeah.
Now, I would like to talk about something very different, which I like it a lot myself. This recipe, which is quite exotic, stewed sparrows. Recipe number 149 in the Kanz. It has been granted by you with the honor of the most interesting dish in the book, and I agree with you. Tell us about this fancy recipe.
Oh, the sparrows. Yeah. First of all, the book says that it is the specialty of Al-Andalus during the time when it was ruled by the Muslims. And he says it is an extraordinary dish which is not really cooked by the ordinary people. It was cooked for the caliphs, for the elites. It was supposed to be a fun dish, but also aphrodisiac. So the way it goes is that first of all you need a special vessel for cooking those sparrows. And there is a long paragraph which describes how to make it. Of course we cannot make it, but he says go to the glass maker and tell him how to make it. First of all it has to be like a pot, regular the shape of a pot, but made of a glass. He said it does not matter how thick or thin the glass is. What matters is that you've got to ask him to put a pontil in the middle, like in the wine bottle when you have this pontil in the bottom. It's a blind pontil, it's not open from the top, up to 3/4 of the pot. He said, but you have to be careful. First of all, be careful when you deal with the glass, not to put it while it is hot on a cold surface, not to replenish boiling water with cold water because it will break. And water always, while this is boiling in the pot, it has to come above the level of the pontil. So you have to replenish water all the time. So now we come to the dish itself. He says, prepare the ingredients. You have sparrows, keep their heads, slaughter them, but keep their heads dangling. Don't cut anything except their feet. So you keep the sparrows as they are. Clean their bellies. And you've got to have soaked black chickpeas, soaked yellow chickpeas. You need fennel, not so big, and other smaller vegetables. So he said you put them all these things in the pot, fill the pot. And the fire has to also to be made in a special way. It needs a special stove, which is called nafakh nafsihi. Nafakh nafsihi, it means that it is the stove that blows its fire by itself. In order to keep the fire going, you need bellows, to pump into, either blow into the fire, or you need bellows to encourage the fire. But for this one, he said, keep it at a place that is open to the wind. The way it is made, it is like a box, and it is perforated. It is holes all around. And the pot would sit in the middle of this box, and the wind, of course, will circulate the air inside the coal fire, very slow coal fire, and it will keep it going. This is important because the purpose of this dish was that it should keep on simmering and cooking and being enjoyed by the revelers all night long. So they need this kind of slow fire that fans its flame by itself. So the attraction of this dish is that it was not only delicious. Of course, it was not a main dish. It was supposed to be taken as a side dish, a small one. While imbibing alcoholic drinks, of course, they would need to feed themselves all night long with a small plate. They would put a sparrow, they would eat it. He said the beauty of this dish is not only its delicious taste, but also looking at it. Because it is a glass, they would look at all those sparrows coming up and down with the black and yellow chickpeas also moving all about, and the fennel and all this. It was a sight. He said the sight of this dish being cooked is even more interesting, far more better than its taste. So to me, that's really a wonderful dish. I haven't seen it described anywhere else.
Wow. The degree of complexities go into this dish is incredible. It's like a ceremonial dish. It's not only a dish that would fill you, but it's a dish that you should linger the enjoyment from overnight.
Yes, be entertained by it.
Probably for better of people like caliphs and viziers, not everyone could have this fancy dish, but it's truly amazing. Even the pot itself and how it's being made.
It's not just cooking and that, it's an art.
It's art, yeah, exactly. I reckon that you also mentioned a little bit about the drinks. I understand that drinks were important part of the cuisine at the time. What was the function of drinks? Only for quenching the thirst, or what was the role of drinks before and after the meals?
Yeah, well, first of all, when they had their meals, they were not supposed to drink water because they thought that it will interfere with the digestion of the food. Only if you need to drink and drink in small sips. Those drinks that he describes are non alcoholic. So the function of those drinks, as you say, to quench thirst. That is one of the obvious functions, but also because of their regenerative properties, because they were prepared with the spices, and depending on what spices used, what kind of ingredients used, they were either good for summer, either good for winter. In addition to that, they were also used for sick people. If they are feverish, they would need a lemon drink. They needed some heat. They would make a drink made with carrots because it's hot in properties. So depending upon what they are used, I mean, they were not only as used as thirst quenchers, but also for their regenerative properties and sometimes for soothing some ailments like coughs, and also because they were digestive. So that's why they had them after the meal. Some of them, they were believed to improve the nekha, which is the smell of the breath, or sometimes to disperse winds, which is densities in foods. They would have kind of drinks that are hot in properties to help break down those densities. So because they believed in the theory of the four humors that govern everything in nature, including the human body.
You just naming the terms like the properties, food properties, and the tempers or temperament of each food. These were the elements very significant for traditional medicine at the time. Can you elaborate a little bit more about what was these four elements and how in details Kanz has addressed these advices?
Yeah, in medieval times, they believed in the tenets of the Galenic theory, which was based on the four elements: air, earth, fire, and water. And each element has its own properties: cold and moist, cold and dry, hot and moist, and hot and dry. And the same thing with the human body. It also has the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and the black bile. Each of those humors, they have their own properties, the same. The whole universe was based on this. Even foods, even cooking utensils like copper, they believed it was hot. They called it feminine in properties. Iron was cold. That's why, for example, because fish is considered cold in properties, it was better to fry it in copper, for example, skillets, to balance its cold properties. So whatever you come across in those cookbooks, they were all based on those properties and the four elements.
Interesting. It seems that like a very holistic view of the word extended to the realm of food and drinks. Yeah, I think we should put aside an episode on this, how the traditional medicine were looking the elements, properties, and temperaments. But thank you for opening up this for maybe another conversation in our podcast. But here, I would like to talk about a little bit about the cultural traces in the cans. I myself astonished by the abundance of Persian or Persian-inspired dishes and ingredients in the cans, which there were many. For example, ajamiya pudding, which I think is very similar to what we call it these days, kachi, and I like it very much. Shirazi stew, Barmaki stew, Queens of Isfahan, Cumin of Kerman, apricots of Khorasan, Naren, Shir, Limu, and many more. What other cuisine cultures have visible traces in the cans. I'm sure you have a sharp eye for the Iraqi ones. But how about like an Andalusi, Maghrebi, or other culture of that time?
Well, as we said, the geographical, location of Egypt encouraged people to come from east and west to congregate in Cairo and the country. So we have people from Iraq. They fled to Egypt, especially after the ransack of Baghdad by the Mongols. We have Sudanese, we have Moroccans, especially during the time of the Fatimids. The Maghrebi, for example, the Maghrebi and the Andalusi element, we find it in couscous. People would be surprised that they find couscous in an Egyptian cookbook, but because there were Moroccans, they brought it with them. The method for cooking couscous, couscousia, and cooking it the proper way. We have dishes coming from Iraq, and I recognize them because they are similar to the dishes that we find in the Baghdadi cookbooks from even an earlier time, like Ibrahimiya, Sikbaja, and Nirbaja. They came, of course, through Iraq. They were either called by their Arabic names, for example, Rummaniya, which is the pomegranate stew, or called by its Persian name, Narsuk. The zirbaja, for example, it was cooked all over the place. Sikbaja is a vinegar stew, beef stew usually, that is soured by vinegar, which has the Persian influence, but it came from the east to Egypt, and it became a mainstream dish. And as I said, there is the Ibrahimiya dish. Ibrahimiya dish is typically Baghdadi because it is called after the half-brother of Harun al-Rashid, Ibrahim bin al-Mahdi. He himself was an excellent cook. He has a cookbook in his name, although it didn't survive, but we know about his recipes. So many dishes were called after his name, like Ibrahimiya, and they also traveled even all the way to Al-Andalus. So we do have elements other than the indigenous dishes that were already in the region.
I think our listeners by now should be very curious about the language of the Kanz. I would like to read out one of the recipes, which is riba siya. It's a stew, and after that, we can continue our conversation. Ribasiya. It is made with meat which has been boiled and then sweetened with some spices. Add to it a small amount of finely chopped onion and pour rhubarb juice on it. Also, add finely pounded sweet almonds which have been blended with water, morabba. Crumble a sprig of dried mint on top of it. Let it simmer on a low fire is and then one recipe from a truly wide range of slow-cooked meat dishes presented in the Kanz using an unusual mix of ingredients. Other examples are meat dishes made with pomegranate, as you mentioned, apricot, apple, quince, mint, pistachio, rosewater, masticum, and many more. Do we know what proportion of these beautiful culinary heritage is still alive in Western Asia and North Africa? Maybe you can recognize the ones that are still being used in Iraq.
Oh, yeah. For example, there is the marwaziya dish also mentioned in the book of Kanz. Marwaziya is the prawn stew. And we know nowadays prawn stew is tagine, is very well-known dish in Morocco. We cook dishes nowadays similarly, but we might call them differently. For example, Korumbiya stew, we call it differently. We call it maraq lahana, for example. Egypt still called it korum. We call it lahana. Many of the dishes that, for example, couscous is still being cooked in the same way in North Africa.
In our culture, I can say najasiya is still alive. My mom used to make it, and my grandma as well. Egg with spinach.
Yeah. Buraniya, for example, it is an eggplant dish. Do you have buraniya eggplant dish in Iran?
Yeah, we use exactly the same name.
Yes, yeah. I mean, in Iraq, we don't call it buraniya, but we eat eggplant the same way. I mean, the name lived also in Afghanistan. So you don't know where those dishes disperse, by passage of time. Sorry, I mentioned the hummus butahina. Everybody, I mean, wonders where it comes from, the hummus butahina. But we have about 11 recipes that are called hummus kassa in this book, which is hummus butahina but made more elaborately. I think by passage of time, hummus butahina became simpler. Nowadays it's just hummus, mashed hummus with the tahini sauce and garlic and so on. In Ken's recipes, they used, for example, crushed nuts like crushed pistachio, which makes it green, very nice. They crush herbs like parsley and mint to add more flavor to it. But the thing is that they made it without garlic. Nowadays, people use it with garlic. I don't know why they didn't use garlic. I think later on, people just.
Yeah, makes sense. Some recipes have been simplified over time, and some recipes have been adapted to different cultures, but still you can trace the roots of the recipes. And this is what beautiful about this book. Each dish and meal has got a profile and has a story. And would you share with us any recipe you have relished yourself with from the camps, or have you made any that you would like to highlight?
Oh yeah, I can I can share because I made about 23 or so of the dishes in an appendix at the end of the book, and they were really lovely. We would say, as we eat them, why don't we cook like this anymore? Let me give you a menu, not only one dish. You start with an appetizer. You start with the olives, and a dish of seasoned olives. And the way they season them is really something we don't do nowadays. You crush hazelnuts, you crush walnuts, and you add to the olives, in addition to a generous amount of olive oil, of course, and coriander. And really refreshing here is that you chop salted, preserved lemons, like the Moroccan preserved lemons. You chop them and you add them. The side dish really brings out its flavor. It really tastes so fresh. All right. So now we come to the main dish. My favorite is fried fish with sumac sauce. You fry pieces of fish. I used white fish. I fried them, and then when I prepared the sauce, I used sumac, crushed walnuts, coriander, the same thing, and of course they are all fried well, and then with some water so that it looks like a sauce, and you spread it on the fish and eat it. It's really nice because, as they believed, the fish has to be eaten with sauce in order to facilitate its digestion. When we come to dessert, I would recommend virgin's breasts. They are cookies, really aromatic cookies. It's a mixture of flour, almond flour, and rose water, some oil. Mix them, and you make like balls of them. If you like, you can stick a raisin in the middle. That's my addition. The recipe doesn't add this. And when you bake them, they will flatten a little bit, but they still look domed, but they really smell marvelous, and the taste is really delicious. So that's my medieval Egyptian menu for you.
Wow, thank you for this generous menu. I really can smell the soury and savory taste from that fish with sumac. And also, it's good that you mentioned that you've got this list of recipes that you have made yourself at the end of the book. So, for the people who don't have sufficient time to go through reading all the book, they can just select the final chapter and make some good and different food for themselves.
Yes.
And as a final question, I would like to know, may you have any other publications we should wait for in the world of culinary culture? Do you have anything you're working on at the moment?
Yeah, well, it's still, at the beginning, but I have just had one published recently, 2 months ago.
Well, congratulations. What is it all about?
Yeah, it is the translation of the second Andalusi cookbook. I translated the first Andalusi cookbook, Andalusi Maghribi, in 21. And this one, it's called Smorgasbords of Andalusi and Maghribi Dishes. In Arabic, it is أنواع الصيدلة في ألوان الأطعمة. That's my new thing now. I need to have a break a little bit and then embark on another.
Great. So we have much to explore. Thank you, Nawal. It was an amazing conversation. We talked through many interesting aspects of cuisine culture, and we look forward to your new books.
Thank you. It was really a pleasure. Thank you.
Our editor and creative consultant is Kate O'Connell. Erdogan Kars from Monash University and Ashkan Bahrani from Al-Akhawain University are the content advisors. Frank Joachim read the passages from the Travels of Ibn Battuta. The music is composed by Ali Gogin and Tia Goodwin, cover art designer. All the passages from Ibn Battuta Observations have been selected from the English translation, The Travels of Ibn Battuta, translated from Arabic to English by Hamilton Gibb and Charles Beckingham, published for the Hakluyt Society in 5 volumes. You can follow Oriental Journeys on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. You can also check out our website, www.theorientaljourneys.com, which contains key information and codes on each episode.